Thank you so much for this opportunity to present our ongoing work. Let me introduce my team. Eamon, she's sitting here, Marine and Kate, and also Javeria, she's supporting us in this project. The idea behind this, that as all of us know, that the unconditional cash transfer is very common, especially in developing areas, and all of us know about the National Cash Transfer Program introduced by Government of Pakistan back in 2008 and 9. So after passing like around 10 to 12 years, there is a question arises whether we should have to continue this program, or there is any need to ensure the life cycle of this program. You know, there are like long-term impact of this program, and the well-documented literature on the poverty impacts, human capital impacts, mobility impacts are there. But there is a less known about if the suddenly government decided to stop the cash transfer to those beneficiaries. You know, the question that comes to us, that what happened to those beneficiaries? Do they need some sort of additional support from other sources, or they have enough capital after 10 years or 12 years to sustain for without having this cash transfer? So this was the entire background of this study, where we try to see when government decided to exclude with the notion that they are actually have enough PMT, the welfare score, to make sure that they would no longer need some sort of assistance. The question that we are looking for, what would be the economic and social situation of those also. There is a very less work on this, though there is a lot of work on the short term, medium term and long term impact of the cash transfer program, especially the UCT, but less known about the impact when it stopped there. So I'll briefly touch upon the background of this program. As most of you people know, the cash transfer program started in 2008, was meant to provide some sort of consumption smoothing to ultra poor. How they define ultra poor, they use this welfare score from 0 to 100, where they use different criteria to measure the welfare of the household. Based on that, they decided that around like 5 to 7 million households fall below the cutoff line. Those are considered to be eligible for the cash transfer program. Now, after like 10 years, as I said, the government recertify all those beneficiaries. Those were getting financial support from the BISP over the last 10 years to make sure that whether they need further assistance or not. So this program primarily meant to provide a financial support to the women, so it's a woman-centric program. As I said, the objective of program was to, in the short run, it was inflationary pressure just like now, to give some sort of consumption support, but medium to long term, it helps to give some sort of women empowerment and also to develop human capital. The currently government is targeting around 9 billion. There was like some sort of evolvement of this program. It was started with the 3 million household, then subsequently it was expanded to 5 million, and now recently over 9 million low-income families are getting benefit from the BISP, and the current quarterly amount is 8,500 per quarter. How they selected beneficiary, this is again a question of research, and again they started with a parliamentarian phase where they use parliamentarian to select the beneficiaries. Subsequently, they use more scientific method, that what we call proxy mean test, to define welfare score of each household. For that, they did a census across the country, and then they collected around data of 23 million households across the country, and based on that, they used the 16.17 as a cutoff point to declare as eligible. Again, how they decided is 16.17 is based on a couple of policy decisions. One was to what amount they're really looking for to give to the beneficiaries, total budget allocation available to government, and the number of beneficiaries they are looking for. Based on that, they did some sort of simulation to identify this criteria. So how we come up with this existing study? As I said, in back 2016, the government decided to recertify the beneficiaries because it's like a global phenomena. Or in the years 5 to 7, normally the social demographic of the household start changing. To to study about those changes and try to see whether the existing beneficiaries still need additional support or any other or the new household those fall below the poverty line and they need additional support, they start this recertification. Subsequently, they started a new census, that what they call the National Socioeconomic Registry Update. Using that National Socioeconomic Registry Update, they collected data of 34 million households across the Pakistan. It's almost another census as they did back in 2010 and 11. Now they just completed another census in 2018 to 2020. Based on this new NSCR, the new data set, they just to identify the new, they apply new eligibility criteria, the PMT formula. Earlier, PMT formula was based on 23 different indicators, but they extended and they improved the targeting method to redefine the poverty formula. And based on that, they decided to exclude those households whose score is above the cutoff. So then it means there is some sort of transition. But BISP noted that around 60% households remain poor after 10 years and they are still eligible. But remaining 40%, around the few those were graduated based on the new criteria that they used to identify those beneficiaries. So and few more become eligible. It means there is a transition. Few exited from the program due to the higher PMT score, and few fall below the poverty line and they become eligible for the program. Based on that, they decided to de-link those households, those are graduated based on their criteria of this PMT score, they de-link these beneficiaries. And we surveyed those beneficiaries. I just explained in the coming slide how we did sampling and what is our criteria. So we defined a group, those are actually getting benefit over the last 10 years, but based on the new NSCR, they will not be eligible for the next tranche. And they were informed by the BISP that you are not eligible. So as I said, we divided this analysis into two parts. First, we are looking for the long-term impact. For the long-term impact, we have two groups. One, those are the part of BISP over the last 10 years, and we compared with the household. Those are close to the cutoff, but they were not eligible for the program. Then the part that is really important for us, the discontinuation. In this specific diagram, if you look into the bottom part of this figure, you can see that these are all the beneficiaries, those were eligible before this new NSCR. So they were getting the benefit till 2020, but based on the new NSCR, few of them were excluded from the program. So our group in this, we are comparing those are still eligible, even based on the new NSCR, with those were excluded due to this new eligibility criteria that they become ineligible due to the higher PMT score. So, and then we decide the bandwidth that very much close to each other, so the both groups should be comparable. So for sampling purpose, we use various administrative data. We start with the National Socioeconomic Registry that was conducted in 2010-11. So we use the census in 2010. Then we use the census conducted in 2020. So these were the two censuses that provide us a sampling framework to extract the sample for this study. We focus in one district, keeping in view the financial constraint. We focus in one district. So based on the initial NSCR, so we have a complete information of all households, those were eligible, as well as those were not eligible for the program. And based on the new NSCR, now we have the two like a census where there is you can identify those households those were eligible in the old NSCR, but they were not eligible in the new NSCR. So we use these two census data set to extract our sample. We surveyed in December 21 as a baseline to collect information before actually government announce that policy where they are trying to de-link the beneficiaries. So then we wait for 1 year where they complete a 1 year after the discontinuation to complete the end line. So first we discuss the long-term impact. That's the key part of this whole exercise, whether BISP, that is the unconditional cash transfer, would have any long-term impact on the resilience part of the beneficiaries. And we find a very significant result either in food consumption, the quality of food that they have, either there's like some sort of economic distress where they're coping with the various stress based on the either it's the economic or the other shock. So this implies that there is a very strong impact. And again, the policy question that comes to mind, if it has a very strong long-term impact, then what would be the role of condition where we are have a different conditional program that ultimately increase the cost of implementation. So that is again a policy question, how we can compare these results with the conditional cash transfer, those mainly you can find in the Latin American and other countries. The next, we also find that there is a strong impact on women empowerment. You can find that it is substantially increased their participation in the market. That is one of the key indicators to say that the women participation has increased. The women empowerment substantially increased with this program. It was one of the key objective of this program by making it a woman-centric to empower them. They participated in the political decision making process, and they have all kind of like empowerment, especially those linked with the cash transfer. Now the question for us that I'll explain next slide, what happened with them when the cash substantially, so is there any resilience? Is there any, like they have enough resources to cope up with the cash shock those are facing with this policy decision, or they fall back to the poverty? For that, this give you an idea of what happened. So we can find from this table that the result or the benefit they are getting from the cash transfer program, they sustain in terms of ensuring there's resilience. So we cannot find any negative implication within the short term, because the study was happened with the period of 1 year. So we are very cautious about the implication of these results. Maybe it have a different implication in the long run, but within the very short period of time, they have enough capacity to cope with this shock that is in term of this cash discontinuation. Similarly, normally we perceive that this cash transfer is only enable women to participate in the market, to become empowered. But when there is no cash, what happened to with them? Is there a backlash in terms of their decision making? So we cannot find any evidence of such happening over there. They still remain participated in terms of their decision making and in their term of mobility. We cannot find any negative implication. Those push them to back to the houses and make sure that they know you are not getting any cash and there is no incentive to allow you to participate in these type of discussions. So it means that within the 1 year there is they have enough capacity to retain, but in the long run what happened median to long run, still it's a question for us, and there is a need to do a comprehensive study after 3 years or 4 years to see what happened with them. Do they have enough capital, especially the human capital, that help them to sustain? Do they have enough income diversification that help them to keep out of this poverty trap? So we also study few others where we did not find any impact after discontinuation. It means so they have like enough capital to sustain. I conclude with like this, that even after 1 year, we cannot find any significant impact in terms of reversal of those benefits those were getting from all those programs. But it also leaves us few questions about the efficacy of program in terms of conditional versus unconditional debate. Because if the impact sustain after the program, and if you can find the studies, especially on this graduation conducted in Bangladesh, India, and other countries, even the graduation programs that are meant to create income diversification, their impact died on after a specific period of time, especially after 6 to 7 years. You can find there is a downward trend in terms of their impact. So if with the weak capacity, another important question for us are the observation that the Pakistan succeeded even with the weak state capacity to implement this massive program with a very, very minimal leakages that is standard in other programs, as well as the cost of implementation is much lower. So we have to think about the efficacy of all these programs. Thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah. So thanks so much for that. And yeah, it was a pleasure to read the paper. Although it was a very early version of the paper, so some of the stuff that I'm going to bring up here has been addressed in the presentation now. So, so just a summary. Let me stand up. So to summarize again. We're looking here at the welfare effects of cash transfers and specifically of their discontinuation. I see this as sort of a good example of the literature on cash transfers in general maturing as we sort of accept that cash transfers are good in certain cases, but are trying to understand when they're not as good and what sort of what happens in these cases when they are discontinued, which if we don't see them as a sort of chronic social policy intervention is something that has to happen. So as mentioned, cash transfers might end for good or bad reasons. We can consider sort of graduating out of a cash transfer program as something that's part of the program design compared to, for instance, austerity, exclusion errors made over time, for instance. And this is a case of the first. So we could think of this is sort of the best case of what would happen if cash transfers are discontinued when people graduate out of them. Things might look different if they're mistakenly or discontinued for other reasons. So about 30% of the sample that we're looking at here became ineligible. I had a slight question here about, or depending on how you read it, 30% became ineligible or 60% maintained their status. Importantly, it was not anticipated, this discontinuation, so there weren't those anticipation effects. And there are two questions here. It's like, 10 years on, what difference does receiving and continuing to receive cash transfers have on welfare outcomes? And the second is, what happens when you graduate out of the program? Do we see these effects dissipate? And the results are like a resounding sort of positive effects of the cash transfer program for those who continue to receive them, but no real evidence of dissipation for those who do graduate out of the program. So my main comment here was the paper that I read was sort of a little bit more pessimistic actually in its narrative than has come across now, and I think that's right. I think there's like a more positive story here. There's quite a positive story about the enduring effects and sort of potential to graduate out of these programs. With the caveat that was brought up now is that these are just two missed payments. There might be more negative longer term effects, and that would be really interesting to look at. I wanted to. So the paper also reports a number of other tables on. So what we saw here were the headline results on a number of indices. The paper also reports results for the sort of components of those indices, which didn't seem as positive, and I don't know if that's that's changed for the long-term effect. So things like consumption and the specific items of sort of negative coping strategies. They didn't see. I wasn't seeing these sort of strong positive effects that we see in the indices, and I was wondering why that was the case, and how the indices were constructed, why the outcome variables that were chosen. And then what effect, if we see any effect of discontinuation on these sort of less rosy outcome variables. Then I was wondering about cost effectiveness. So here maybe we'd be more narrowly limited to consumption effects here, but yeah, how cost effective is the program, and do we see any reduction in that after discontinuation? Okay, and then finally, the paper was incomplete, and I'm sure you will have a discussion about the implications for, in general, the assessment of benefits of cash transfer programs. And yeah, let me stop there. I've got a couple of other minor comments which I'll email to you directly. But yeah, thank you very much.
Hi. So I have one question. I was thinking about, so we know that like with rupee devaluation, right, the real value of the cash is decreasing over time. So what I'm thinking about is it like, could it be possible that the value of cash transfer whenever it discontinued got so insignificant compared to the household income of these people, and that's one of the reasons why you're observing that those null effects. And this becomes pressing concern because you're looking at households that are right at the threshold, right, for which I don't know how much of a value the cash adds. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is that the reason government gives cash transfer here is to support poor families so that they can live reasonably okay. But do you see in the data that those who get the transfers get out of the program, and how long does it take, and what do they do when they get out of the program? Second is, if you find a weak effect on consumption, what is going on with their cash? I mean, I would assume that the poor families would, their marginal propensity to consume is nearly 1. So if they are not consuming, are they saving up that money, or what is really going on there? And third one is that those indices that you showed us, those indices relate to the recipients, or they're aggregate?
It's the recipient.
So did you conduct the surveys of the recipients to gauge their whatever we are measuring? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Nasir. So in my view, I mean, we look at BISP and it is more social protection than graduation, right? Yeah. So when we talk about the 40% or 30% that have graduated over the 10 years with the new data, what can we infer as to why these households have graduated compared to other households that have remained within the cutoff point? And secondly, with when we were talking about graduation programs, I know in Bangladesh with Imran Rasool, etc., when they've done the 10, 15-year evaluations, there have been a lot of positive results on women's sort of asset bases and their kind of, and a whole variety, a range of sort of landowning and other impacts coming out of the graduation programs. Maybe not so much in Pakistan. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yeah, definitely.
So I just wanted to ask also on that, there aren't any effects on income generation, even in the long term, right? So it doesn't seem like a graduation program in the same way that other big push interventions are. So I'm just wondering if you have a sort of, even a sense of what might be driving these null effects on consumption if there isn't a long-term transformation in income generating capacity.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I come back to all these questions one by one. So the first, I start with the graduation point where you say that if the 30% is graduated, what actually the source of graduation, whether they have an income diversification, whether they have enough human capital. On a separate study, I'm just trying to answer this question, because for that I'm using the two census I just explained, the census those was conducted back in 2010 and the census conducted in 2020. So it gives us enough space where we have complete information of all individuals, whether they participated in the labor market, do they have enough human capital, do they have enough health, and are there any other thing. For the BISP, another important question was whether it's a formula-driven graduation or it is actually linked with the actual graduation. So still that question remains unanswered, because at that time there was no a very large panel to answer this question, and they were using this highest data to reconstruct the new PMT formula. And the question related to the study on the graduation, of course, the graduation have a different implication, and their result definitely sustained, but the cost is very important, especially if we look into the scalability of those programs. It's very difficult in the country like us, where there is a weak state capacity and you don't have enough resources. What are the alternative model that give an equal, not equal, but at least enough opportunity to these people to grow and to break this poverty trap? Because in the graduation, those were actually implemented in Pakistan. They are all only based on the pilot basis, and they have a very small coverage. So they don't have enough thing like that. Yes, very true. The marginal propensity to consume is almost equal to 1, and they mostly use. And this program primarily meant for the consumption. Though we did not cover in much detail in this study, but in a separate paper, I try to figure out where is the diversion of these resources. In one of our studies, so there is a weak relation with the consumption part and where they invested. So where I find that over the period of time, their consumption pattern evolves. In the earlier stages of the program, they invested mostly on the luxury part of the item. For example, they invested on the washing machine, similar like that, or fan within the household. But when after 6 to 7 years, they start diversifying their use of the income, maybe in most recently the concept of this ICT and other component, and similarly on the use of the other equipment, that one of the finding that from the other study, that they invested in term of this bike. Previously we didn't find these things. So these evolving impact would give us some idea. Maybe they have some other preferences based on the long-term affiliation from this BISP, and now they have enough resources to meet their consumption need and diversify their income. But still the study is ongoing, and maybe we can find more result on the later stage. As long as the first question about the value of cash, as you mentioned, maybe there are some catch-up effect over there, but when we are comparing very close to each other, so even a marginal amount if given to a treatment group and the same was discontinued from the other group, it definitely have some implication. And they also index this value with the inflation, not with the exchange rate, but they try to index this cash transfer with the inflation. It started with the 1,000 and a 3,000 per quarter. Now I mentioned that its amount is 8,500, roughly almost same if you compare with the purchasing power parity. They are getting the same amount. So the impact basically. And the last yours, of course it's an ongoing process, and we are doing analysis again and again, and there are some changes in the outcome, and the weak association with the subcomponent of those indices need further elaboration, and we will definitely look into those issues as well.
So we can take one more question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How much time do I have? 30 minutes, 50. Okay. Okay, great.
Rocco.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you. So this is a paper by myself, colleagues at BIGD in Bangladesh, Narayan, Rosina, and Maliha. Thank you. As well as Stefan Durkon, who we heard speak this morning, and Ashley Popel at the World Bank. So what I'm going to speak about is, as was just brought up by an audience member, one of these graduation programs in Bangladesh, implemented by BRAC, the same as the Imran Rasool and Bandiera papers. And here what we're interested in is bringing these programs to scale, some of the bottlenecks that policymakers face in bringing these programs to scale, specifically the coaching component. So the coaching component of these bundled programs is one of the more difficult elements to scale, and we're trying to disentangle how sensitive the effects that we see of these programs are to the amount and the type of coaching that people receive through the programs, to see if we're leaving any money on the table here, and could leverage that to bring programs to scale. So, to give you a bit of a background on these ultra-poor graduation programs, so one of the reasons that people are poor today is that they were poor yesterday. People are stuck in poverty traps. And if people are stuck in poverty traps, what they might need to get out of that poverty trap is a big push. Not just a cash transfer, not just an asset transfer, not just coaching, but all of the three at the same time to alleviate multiple barriers to upward mobility simultaneously. And the idea here is that would push people into a virtuous cycle which takes them out of poverty. These big pushes comprise of a large asset transfer, typically regular consumption support, so that sort of removes the incentive to liquidate the asset to use for consumption, trainings, access to savings facilities, microfinance, etc. And there's growing evidence that these big push interventions are lastingly effective, even at 10 years. So, some background on the program. It was introduced first in 2002 in Bangladesh by BRAC. So far, BRAC's UPGP has reached 2 million women in Bangladesh alone. At the same time, it's being scaled up across the world. 75 countries in the world currently have some or have had some version of a graduation program, reaching something like 92 million people as of 2020. But while these programs are effective, they're also very expensive and they're very difficult to scale. And specifically, where programs like this rely on human resources are especially difficult to scale. It's easier to spend the marginal dollar than it is to train the marginal coach. So we need more evidence on which of these components are essential and which can be trimmed without costs to the effects. So coaching is important, but it's expensive. So it approximately accounts for 40% of the program cost to the UPGP in Bangladesh. That's approximately the same as the asset transfer itself. And it requires high organizational capacity and human resources. So what we're doing here is investigating how sensitive the program's impacts are to the amount, to variation in the amount and the type of coaching that is delivered, and we implore some of the implications for scale. So the specific program that we're investigating was implemented in 2016. As I've said before, has this large bundle. 80% of recipients received a cow. So in most cases, we can think of the asset that people are getting as a cow. Okay, the remainder received 4 goats, so it's almost always livestock. Coaching continues for 18 months after the asset transfers. For 18 months, they get coaching and regular consumption support. So the sort of active part of the program lasts about 18 months. What does the coaching include? It includes a wide variety of things. So I'm calling it coaching to intentionally remain vague about it's not just training, it's also soft skills training, it's also a compliance check, you're being visited every week, and the expectation is that you're not liquidating your asset for 18 months. That's a sort of soft commitment that you make. It's training on how to manage your business, how to care for your cow, and also how to look after your children, that check that you're sending your children to school, etc. Coaching on the base intervention is delivered on a weekly basis through a BRAC employee who visits the household of the recipient. And these last about half an hour. So they're really intensive interventions. But we're going to create, in 2016, we introduced some variation, the amount and the intensity of this coaching. So treatment group 1 gets weekly home visits, and that's the pre-2016 standard. Okay, everyone pre-2016 programs received weekly visits. In treatment group 2, we halve the amount of coaching that people receive. So instead of weekly, they get fortnightly home visits. In treatment group 3, we add to treatment group 2 fortnightly group meetings. So this is sort of a different delivery, a different mode of delivery of coaching. We collected baseline data in 2016, endline data 6 years later in 2022, after the COVID shock. So the 3 questions we're asking: does the program work? Do the effects that we observe for the overall program depend on the amount of coaching that people receive? And if coaching works, how does it work? So in the third, we're going to speak a little bit more speculatively about some of the possible mechanisms that we're seeing here. But to give you a bit of a preview, does the program work? Yes, it works. Does it matter how much coaching people receive? No, it doesn't. If coaching does work, how does it work? Probably not through skills transfers, more likely through the compliance mechanism to simplify what's a slightly more complicated question here. Okay, so the study design. The study population is about 8,500 households. We stratify randomization at the district level. We've got 3 treatment groups and a control group. The control group gets nothing. Treatment group 1 gets the full BRAC package with weekly coaching, 2 with fortnightly coaching, 3 with fortnightly plus group meetings. We're not worried about attrition. Attrition's about 13%. It's uncorrelated with treatment status. Randomization achieves balance, and so that's sort of the basic design here. Very simple identification strategy here. What we're interested in are these dummies, the treatment dummies, and those betas are the treatment effects. So, what's the impact of the program, the overall program? So I'm giving us 3 sets of results here: the overall results, the results of the coaching variance, and some of the mechanisms. So overall, we're considering the impact of each treatment on a range of welfare-relevant, pre-specified welfare-relevant outcomes: assets, consumption, earnings, hours, land holdings. We find large and significant effects on all outcomes, and the effect sizes that we see are roughly comparable to those that we see in other similar graduation approaches, including those by Bandiera and the pilots by Banerjee et al. We're robust here to multiple hypothesis test corrections. So to give you a very, very quick view of results, these percentages are compared to the control group in each case. So we've got a 100% increase in the value of assets held, 110 to 140%, depending on the treatment condition, increase in the likelihood of owning a cow. So there's just a footnote here, which is that the control mean is very low. So everybody in the treatment groups received a cow. So we would expect that 100% or close to 100% of everyone who received the program had a cow if we were to have surveyed them one day after the transfer, right? 6 years down the line, only about 25 to 30% of the treatment population still own cows. Okay, so while it's a large treatment effect compared to control, the control group never got a cow. we still have a lot of people who received cows at baseline in the treatment who no longer receive cows. So it's not a completely wonderful result, 110% increase. Consumption, though, goes up this is per capita household monthly consumption, goes up between 10 and 20% for the treatment group. This, again, a reminder here is that this is several years after regular consumption support ends. Earnings go up 30%, the likelihood of owning land goes up 20%, and the value of land owned goes up 60 to 110%, and people spend more time on sort of high productivity tasks such as livestock rearing, and reallocate their hours worked away from sort of lower productivity tasks like maid labor. So good effects of the program on whole. So the differential impact of these coaching variants. So overall it works, but do any of the particular coaching interventions work significantly better than the other? And what we would expect here is if coaching was really, really important on the margin, that the weekly coaching group would perform better than those who received half the amount of coaching. We don't see that, okay? So there's no significant differences in any of the outcomes across treatment groups. I'm not going to show you the table here, but it's just a bunch of null results, and they're fairly precisely estimated. Given that coaching is a bottleneck to scale, this is the main result of the paper. Okay, this is good news for scaling these sorts of interventions. So going on to mechanisms, here the study wasn't designed to really tease out mechanisms. So here we're having to do a little bit more exploratory work here. And so something that does come out of previous literature which does attempt to sort of unbundle these graduation approaches to see what elements are driving impact and are results of the overall intervention robust to removing an element. What these papers seem to find is that when you remove coaching from these bundled ultra-poor graduation programs, the effects of the overall program dissipate substantially. So it does, if we believe these studies, then coaching is an important part of the program. We can't answer that directly because we don't have a treatment arm that receives the program without coaching. So it's a little bit of I'm asking you to take a little bit of a leap of faith here. But let's just take for granted that coaching does matter. Let's assume that coaching does matter. Then we want to ask why. So, and two of the key sort of hypotheses or explanations or justifications of coaching are that coaching is a skills transfer mechanism. People receive a cow, they've never had a cow before, they don't know how to look after a cow, you need to teach them so that they make productive use of that asset. That's the sort of, at least that's what it says on the tin, as it were, for the BRAC program. This is sort of one of the key stories that BRAC tells about the role of its coaching. It increases soft skills, hard skills, etc. The second hypothesis here is compliance, is that what the coach is really doing is going up and following up on the recipient and checking that they're doing what they should be doing, both for the asset and for the program in general. So it's more of a commitment device, a compliance mechanism, than it is a skills transfer mechanism. And we can't definitively disentangle the role of these two mechanisms, but we've got some evidence that sort of points in the direction that what's really happening here is happening through the compliance channel if we believe that coaching is effective rather than through the skills transfer channel. So, to look at the skills transfer hypothesis, we measure two things. We measure the respondents' self-reported confidence in performing various livelihood-relevant tasks. The tasks here, all I wanted to show you was what these tasks are. The tasks are things like looking after your livestock, sending your children to school, being able to manage a dispute if you're running a business, collecting debts, things that came directly out of the modules that were delivered through the coaching. So these were the things that people were supposed to have learned through coaching, and these are livelihood-relevant activities that people are supposed to be able to perform after having gone through the coaching. So we measured that, both for the control and for the treatment groups. The second thing that we measured was respondents reported adherence to animal husbandry best practices. So if you've got a cow, when was the last time you vaccinated it? Has it been dewormed? Has it been cared for in the way that it should have been cared for? The problem with this is that we only ask people who have cows. So the people in the control group who have cows, a very small number of people in the control group, and the people that this differential selection into having cows in the control group relative to the treatment group. So this is a really messy thing to look at, but we'll look at it anyway. But messy to look at when we're comparing treatment and control, but less messy when we're comparing treatment groups to each other. Whereas here, we can compare treatment and control. And what do we find? We find that treatment groups are no better off than control. So the people who received coaching are no more confident in their ability to do the things that they should have been taught to do than the control group who didn't receive any coaching at all. So this is a suggestive evidence that the skills transfer mechanism didn't perform as intended. For number 2 here, adherence to animal husbandry best practices, there are no significant treatment effects, significantly different treatment effects across the treatment groups. So the people who received weekly coaching are no more likely to vaccinate their cows than the people who receive fortnightly coaching. And so maybe I'm not really. I don't want to read too much into this because there are many reasons that might be the case. But I think this first result is instructive. Okay, so that was the skills transfer hypothesis. What can we say about the compliance hypothesis? So what we do is we measure the proportion of recipients who retained their assets by a given year. So this is recall data. So in 2022, we asked them, when did you, do you still have the asset that BRAC gave you? And if you don't, when did you sell or lose it? First of all, assets are mostly liquidated, not lost. So people are selling or not losing their assets. And asset retention is fairly high after 2 years. So most people still have their asset after 2 years. This is sort of shortly after the coaching has stopped. There's a steep drop-off in the following 2 years, and only 20% of recipients have the assets that they originally were transferred 4 years after the program. So without being too sure about this, I think what we're seeing here is a steeper drop-off after coaching ends in assets. And asset retention is correlated with livelihood outcomes. So the people who kept their assets and later on in the program do better in terms of asset holdings, value of land, hours dedicated to livestock rearing, and not so much on earnings, but you can, if you trust the point estimates, they're consistent at least. Let me conclude with that. So just to sum up, the program works. There are no differences across treatment groups, and if you put a gun to my head, I would say that the mechanism through which coaching is working here, if it is working, is not primarily through a skills transfer mechanism, but rather through compliance. And great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to the organizers. Very nice to be here again in Lahore, and thank you to Rocco for the interesting paper. So as Rocco mentioned, I think there's a nice link between the different papers in this session. As Nasir was mentioning, many people are interested in looking at this model, which has some of the most exciting results that we've seen recently in development in terms of the long-term impacts and very large transformational impacts, and thinking about how we can try and get some portion of that impact, but do it in a more financially sustainable way. So as Rocco mentioned, these are very expensive programs, and it's a really first-order important question to think about which components of these expensive programs can we reduce or remove to try and get some of the benefits in a more financially sustainable way. And even the work that Simon is going to present next on our project has a little bit of that motivation. So we're thinking about asset financing and whether financing can be used to get some of the returns from productive assets. And so when Rocco describes that 40% of the cost is coaching, that's a huge amount. The coaching component is as expensive as the asset itself. So again, a very, very important question of whether reducing the coaching component can still lead to some benefits, and they find that they do, which is very promising. Of course, as Rocco just mentioned, now there's no separate treatment arm that completely removes coaching, and that may come to people's minds, but in separate conversations, Rocco has explained, and he just explained now in the presentation, that BRAC just felt so strongly that the coaching component was essential to the success of this program that they weren't willing to remove that completely because they just didn't think it would work, and I think that's absolutely reasonable, right? If they had such a strong prior that at the extensive margin, coaching is important, then the natural question is to think at the intensive margin. A little bit of a tension, I guess, is the finding of no overall difference in outcomes across the treatment arms, and then the search for differences in mechanisms, in intermediate outcomes. Yeah, so that's just something that you'd need to reconcile. But if it's a case of saying we find nothing in terms of the end outcomes, the downstream outcomes, no difference across the contractual contracts, and we find nothing in terms of any of the intermediate outcomes that we hypothesize should be changing, whether it's skills transfer or management practices or liquidation, then that would be a consistent story. Nothing in terms of the downstream and nothing in terms of the intermediate. But the way that the story is going a little bit is that it could be affecting some of the intermediary outcomes, and so then you'd probably have to explain why that doesn't follow through in terms of the downstream outcomes, and not wanting that to question the effect on the downstream outcomes, which are unquestionable. I mean, one of the nicest things about this study is it's a huge sample, right? And as I said, it's exciting because it's good news in a way, right? So we're so used to bad news when it comes to development interventions that work at a small scale, and as soon as we try and scale it up to a different context, to a larger sample, it just doesn't scale, and we're often inundated with bad news about things that don't scale and things that just work on a very, very, very micro scale. And this is a really nice paper because it shows a very large sample that it does scale, even though they do find that some of the things at the 6-year point aren't there. Some of the things that were there at the 4-year point. I think one of the questions from the audience was impact on female empowerment and positive other impact in those other papers at the 4-year stage, which disappear a little bit at the 6-year point. I think that's important for us to document. But overall, I think it's very good news. So on the liquidation thing, it's really interesting how quickly they started liquidating their assets as soon as BRAC disappeared, right? And so I think the paper's moving in the direction of saying a little bit more about that. I know original version of the paper had more of a COVID feel to it, and we discussed how that probably wasn't the best framing, but a natural question is whether that liquidation was linked to COVID shocks, and when exactly that liquidation happened. And so there's another interesting thing that's happening in terms of social inclusion, and so the treatment is leading people to have less interaction with their prior social networks, which I think is consistent with, they have this new kind of social network that the BRAC program brings them into. And there is something in the microfinance literature as well which shows that inclusion in formal financial services can crowd out previous social interactions, so perhaps that's something that you can lead to. One thing that was intriguing was that there was some sort of perception from the richer members of the village. There's some negative effects, right? So being part of this BRAC program meant you were less likely to be included by the wealthier members of the village. And I wasn't sure whether that's something about resentment at why you got the program and they didn't. It's perhaps something just to briefly speculate on. and we've had this conversation as well a little bit about rates of return, which is of course quite difficult to do. But perhaps you can think a little bit about the kind of, if you're doing a benefit cost analysis, and the numerator of the benefits usually we'd think about as the main thing, which is the asset and the income from that asset that's being generated. But I see in some of the outcomes that you have, there are things that we wouldn't necessarily expect to increase. And just clarifying which of those outcomes are more mechanical ones, like the asset itself, income from that generator. But I see there's also greater land ownership and income from other sources that aren't directly linked, or income from other assets or ownership of other assets. So if you are going to think about a cost-benefit analysis where you're able to assert that the reduction of the coaching component can reduce costs, improve the benefit cost ratio while not really affecting the downstream outcomes, those numbers are going to look even more attractive if you start including some of the less mechanical things. And more generally in the paper, it would be nice, just even within the table, just a separation of things where this is like almost like a first stage, or the things that we expect to change from the intervention, and these are the other things. But apart from that, I think it's an important contribution to this asset transfer literature and towards our understanding of how we can try and improve the sustainability of these very exciting graduation programs. Thank you.
So are there any questions?
Hi, I'm Ibrahim. Thank you for the great presentation. Just two really short questions. First is based on your, I guess, prior or even posterior about the potential mechanisms that might be driving these outcomes. How do you think that the variation in the intensive margin of treatment, how that relates to the mechanism? Is it something about giving coaching weekly versus fortnightly? And what's your thinking on how that variation and the intensive margin of treatment might affect potential channels and outcomes? So just wanted to hear more about that. And secondly, I don't know if your data allows for this, but is there any work you were able to do to look at spillover effects on people around those treated, especially in terms of in the context of a skill transfer story, or even any other lessons that they're gaining from coaching itself?
Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is more about the unintended consequences of asset and cash transfer. So in your research, I guess my first question is, what was the gender breakdown of the recipients? Were there more female or male? And if there were more female, did they receive backlash for receiving cash, like asset transfers? Like, I guess the way I'm thinking about it is that when you receive a cash transfer, you can sort of limit the observability of the transfer from other household members. So in the case of asset transfers, how do women fare in that case? So thank you.
We'll just take my next question.
Thank you so much. When we talk about this asset transfer program, the big question is the maintenance cost of this asset transfer. I just completed like survey in 3 districts, and most of the time they sell their asset due to the maintenance cost, because especially if there is a livestock, the return to livestock is much lower as compared to those costs. That really linked with the way they are selling their asset. And quality of asset is also a big question that I found in most of the cases, because they feel that they are not satisfied, though they are getting those assets from based on this intervention, but the quality is questionable. Thank you.
That's it. We don't have.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you to Mohammed. I know you've seen the paper a lot, so I was wondering if you'd have anything new to say, and you definitely did, and this is all really, really helpful, so thank you. So Ibrahim's question on how intensity relates to the mechanisms. So of course there might be various things going on here. You could think of, so maybe on the one extreme, you could think of coaching as really like a training program where there are not like rapidly diminishing marginal returns to receiving coaching, where people are learning new content every week and that content is useful. Or you could think of it as more of like a troubleshooting thing, where there's really high returns to having some coaching, but not that high returns to having an extra week of coaching. So maybe all you want to know is why your cow is having this foot disease, and you can find that out with one visit once a month, versus a weekly. There's maybe there's a lot of redundancy, for instance. So even on the skills transfer hypothesis, there might be like rapidly diminishing marginal returns to coaching there. So that's one way in which it could relate. The compliance obviously is just, you don't need, like, pure compliance could transfer no knowledge at all. It could just be like someone going to check on you and rapping you over the knuckles if you're not doing what's being done. I suppose maybe there's a bit of a tension here in the way that BRAC sees its program. So the way that they speak about coaching is really something. They don't call them recipients; they call them participants. They really see the recipients of the program as co-creators of the program. So the compliance sort of narrative is uncomfortable for BRAC because it's sort of a little bit paternalistic, and I think they don't like that spin so much, even if that's maybe part of what's going on. Then spillovers we couldn't measure, so we only measured outcomes on the recipients themselves. Previous papers have measured general equilibrium effects. Bandera's 2017 paper did look at general equilibrium effects. So we did. That wasn't the focus of this. It's also, of course, very expensive. Then I don't know your name. Sorry, Sarah. Unintended consequences for women. So it's a homogeneously female in terms of recipients. So the program is directed to the eldest woman or the sort of matriarch of the family. We don't see any negative effects on female empowerment or anything like that. Previous versions of the program have seen positive effects. So I think we're fairly confident in this literature that there aren't strong negative effects. We don't see strong positive effects. We also didn't measure female empowerment as well as other studies have. So I don't want to speculate too much on that. Then Nasir. So the maintenance cost of the asset, it's a really good point. And so if the maintenance cost is high and the returns are low, then there's sort of a strong economic incentive to liquidating the asset. I suppose one thing that you made me think about there was, as Mohammed mentioned, there's quite a lot of diversification in terms of investment in assets. What I think is going on, but I need to check this, and you've motivated me to check this, is, so what I think is going on is those people who are investing a lot in land, so there's a huge increase in the value of land holdings on average. I think it's those people who still own cows, rather than people selling cows to then go and buy land, which would sort of speak against the sort of like, we should speak in favor of like a liquidate for consumption sort of story. So, but I need to check that. So I think it would be interesting to know whether the sort of expansion of the asset portfolio, both in terms of quantity and diversity, is happening out of amongst those people who keep livestock or not. Great. Perfect. Thank you so much.
much.